Hi. You're watching Cheating Tales Real Stories. Subscribe, a second for you, real support for me. Before we start, drop a comment with your city or country. Cheating comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a wife. Sometimes it's family. This time, it was my own blood. In 5 minutes a place card with my name would change their room. Marriott in Dallas ran steady without pauses. The carpet smelled like old cleaner and air vents. The clerk in a black shirt worked the iPad without looking up. He asked, "Name?" I answered, "Nathan Cole." He swiped again and said, "You're not on the list." I held a plastic cup of water. They held crystal. Behind us, a cheap soda machine in the hall hummed. Shade for me, light for them. A neat stack of place cards sat on the counter. Heavy paper, gold type, sharp corners that didn't bend. My mother Margaret stood at the bar, facing the room. My father Thomas raised a glass and nodded to the planner. My sister Grace laughed into a camera under the flower arch. A bucket of ice cracked once behind the bar and settled. I stayed by the column where lenses never bothered to reach. Their names sat in the light. Degreaser still clung to my sleeves from the morning yard. Keys to the Ford F-150 knocked once inside my pocket. The 7-Eleven coffee cooled in the truck by the ramp. The clerk nudged the guest list plaque half an inch toward the edge. He said, "I can call the planner." I said, "No need." The rope post at the left door showed a heavy round base. Plastic sounded softer than their glass. The photographer lifted a hand and said, "Family to the stage." I didn't move. No one turned. The planner walked past and waved an attendant forward. Glasses rang together on cue. Napkins stayed white and folded. A server adjusted his tie and looked through me, not at me. Let them call it small. The attendant slid a ledger toward me and set a pen. "Sign-ins for guests without cards," she said steady. Paper lay flat under the glass top, no ripples. I wrote my name in block letters, one clean line. Toner dusted the margin. My fingers stayed clean. She drew the ledger back and squared it with a practiced push. The iPad screen showed columns that cleared, then returned. Paper spoke without emotion. My mother Margaret turned the printed invitation so the words faced the room. My father Thomas lined a program to the table's straight edge. My sister Grace touched the mic and let it go. The MC checked his watch and nodded to the sound tech. The bar back filled another plastic bin with ice and slid it under. A runner lifted the cake stand and set it down without a sound. Later, one signature would stop more than a toast. The groom Eric reached the counter fast, without wasted steps. He told the clerk, "He's with me." The clerk opened the rope at the left door and stepped aside. "Left aisle, no table card," he said, flat and polite. Eric didn't hurry me. He stood near, shoulder to shoulder with the post. He didn't look at me. He looked at the cameras. He pressed one thumb against his cuff and smoothed the edge once. He stood to block my corner from every camera. I stayed where I was and looked at the counter again. Top row of cards sat perfect. One clean card lay off center. No name on it. No crease on the edge. The attendant noticed my eyes and didn't touch a thing. I set the plastic cup near the glass lip, not over it. It scraped lightly and then settled without a ring. A lime knife clicked twice on a small white board and stopped. Cards kept a straight edge. The bartender offered whiskey or wine. I chose water. A tray of crystal passed. The music tested once, then cut. The soda machine dropped a can somewhere down the hall. A child in a suit pointed at the cake. A hand pulled him back. An usher rolled a spare chair away from the aisle and parked it square. Patience also worked. The clerk cracked a drawer of guest lanyards and paused. "Temporary badge?" he asked, voice low enough to hide it. "No need," I said. He closed the drawer without a click. The attendant combed the top row of cards with one finger. The planner recentered a candle and brushed lint off a runner. A florist clipped a stem, caught it, and placed it in a bin. The ledger showed straight lines. My mother Margaret lifted a wrist and turned a bracelet once. My father Thomas tapped his glass with a knuckle and stopped. My sister Grace checked the framing on her screen and smiled. Two cousins I didn't know blocked a light and then stepped aside. I still stood by the column. Their cameras framed each smile. Later, the loudest thing would be a pause. Eric leaned closer. "Side room?" he asked. "After the toast," I said. He nodded once. He stayed between me and the nearest lens and didn't shift. He adjusted his cuff again and left his hand at the seam. He kept his voice level, and he didn't fill the silence. Plastic sounded softer than their glass. The clerk flattened the ledger with a palm at the corner. He lined the sticker square to a small printed code. The attendant kept 2 fingers on the book so it wouldn't slide. The iPad brightness dimmed, then rose, then held. I moved half a step left to stay outside a frame. In 1 second the silence would be louder than the music. Lights shifted toward the stage. The MC lifted his hand. The photographer changed a lens without changing position. My mother Margaret watched the beam, not the door. My father Thomas held his glass a little higher. I still stood in shadow. They framed the light. The clerk breathed once and aimed the scanner at the code. The wand found it, and answered the way it always answered. No cheer, no readout, no call to the room. The attendant nudged the ledger square under glass. Eric didn't move, the cameras didn't take my side. The soda machine hummed again, low and constant, and kept humming. The scanner clicked. The ledger closed. By the pumps the sign blinked. "See cashier." 2 cars paid at the card reader and rolled away. I stood with a plastic cup of coffee and a debit card. The clerk called, "Next," and looked past my shoulder to a kid with scratchers. He said nothing to me. The receipt tape kept whispering for someone else. By evening that place card would not stay blank. Plastic sounded softer than their glass. I set the card on the rubber mat and named the pump. He scanned the cup lid instead of the card. "Number?" he asked again, eyes still on the lottery tray. "4, I said. He rang it slow, then pointed to sign. Signature. I wrote my name on the screen, straight and small. Let them call it small. The receipt curled out warm and even. The change stayed on the counter, not in my palm. The air smelled like syrup and old cleaner. A cheap soda machine hummed in the hall behind the ice chest. He waved the next man forward before I stepped aside. Paper didn't need witnesses. Outside, the heat sat on the hood and stayed there. Degreaser still clung to my sleeves from the morning yard. Dust from the loading lot turned the edges of my boots white. Keys to the Ford F-150 knocked once against the column trim. I pressed the lid until it clicked and set the cup in the holder. Patience also worked. On the passenger seat rested a shoebox with a torn lid. Inside were clear sleeves, a thick pen, 2 fresh markers. I slid the 7-Eleven receipt into a sleeve and pushed the air out. The marker left a gray line across 2 fingers and didn't wipe clean. The sleeve snapped flat and held the paper without ripples. By afternoon 1 receipt would speak louder than a toast. The ramp behind the warehouse kept shade and dry air. The camera above the door blinked red once and stopped. The smell was all cardboard, tape, and clean plastic. I took 2 empties in and stacked them by a scale. Nobody asked who I was or what I carried. Work didn't need introductions. Inside, stretch wrap crinkled across a pallet and quieted. A label printer spat out 2 stickers and cooled down. I wrote the date, time, and initials in block letters. The marker rasped against the slick face and stayed straight. I laid 1 copy on top and trimmed the edge square with a knife. Edges made their own rules. A sedan rolled up slow to the curb space. The window slid down. My Uncle Samuel looked ahead, not at me. He said, "Sit a minute." I got in. The cabin ran cold. He opened the glove box and pulled a wrapped brick of sleeves. "Clear envelopes," he said. "Keep copies. Originals separate." Allies spoke short and plain. "Even the estimate?" I asked. "Separate," my Uncle Samuel answered. Print time. Don't rush. We let the AC work while the engine sat at idle. He looked at the gray on my fingers. Marker means it's in order. It's in order, I said. He gave me one more empty pouch. No ceremony. Just steps. He drove toward the gate and turned without signaling. Light slid once down the hood and was gone. I went back to the ramp and set 2 sleeves out. The plastic creaked as the air ran to the corner. Receipts to receipts, notes to notes, copies to copies. Cards like a straight edge. My phone buzzed, a text from the groom Eric. ETA? He wrote. Before the ceremony. I sent back. The walk-in cooler breathed through the wall and kept its own weather. A stack on the pallet needed 1 inch to square the tag for the camera. I pulled it that inch. The barcode faced clean to the lens. Let them call it small. I got in the truck and shut the door once. The coffee had cooled. The lid flexed and held. On the seat lay a place card without a name, still white. Beside it sat the thick pen, a receipt, and both markers. I looked at the card and took my hand away. Before the first speech that card would find its place. I pulled another clear sleeve and opened it with my thumb. 2 receipts slid in. I wrote time and corner in the lower back. The marker printed through the layer and slowed at the edge. A napkin lifted half the gray, the rest stayed in the skin. I put the keys beside the card so they wouldn't knock in my pocket. Small weight settled things. A boy walked past with an ice tub for Whataburger. Hot, he said, and didn't stop moving. The traffic hum held level without brakes. I checked the card under the sleeve to keep its corners clean. The glove box closed without a click and stayed shut. Plastic doesn't ring. It holds. On your way? Came another text from Eric. On my way, I sent. Nothing else. I moved the card closer and slid the sleeve over it. The gray shadow crossed the white and stayed even. I drank what was left. The lid gave 1 small scrape. No extra words required. I took a coin from the tray and pinned the sleeve on its edge. Another sleeve laid on top. The air walked out in a line. My fingers were gray again. The napkin failed the rest. The pen tapped twice on the console, then stopped. The soda machine at the far wall hummed and didn't change note. Later the loudest thing would be a pause. I started the engine. The idle settled without a shake. The map said 30 minutes to the Marriott. That was enough to arrive without hurry. I checked the seat, place card under a sleeve, receipt on top. Nothing bent. Nothing slipped. Nothing loose under the lip. The room would learn the cost of straight lines. I shut the shoebox and pressed the lid until it met. Tape wasn't needed, the cut fit tight. Corner over corner, no daylight through the seam. I set the box on the floor by the passenger footwell. The coin stayed on the sleeve. The card didn't move. My mother Margaret would stand near the bar by habit. My father Thomas would face the stage before the music started. My sister Grace would test the mic and smile without checking the door. I would still be the one at the edge with paper and quiet. Eric would ask once more and keep the cameras off my side. I rolled out from the lot and took the service road. The morning threw heat off the lanes and left them bright. Trucks fed the back docks, the front drive dressed for flowers. A freeway sign flicked past and cleared the windshield. I counted 3 long breaths and didn't touch the horn. Patience also worked. The tank clicked off at a quarter down from full. I logged the time on the lower right of a copy. The marker sank in the corner and kept its line. I slid the copy behind the card so it wouldn't smudge. The keys went back in my pocket and stayed quiet. No rush. No speeches. The service entrance at the hotel would take a left turn. The place card would ride and clean, not bent. The sleeves would hold each edge until the table mattered. I set the cup back in its ring and checked the lid once more. The lid held. The sleeve held. The card held. The door latched once. The place card stayed still. County records kept glass between the desk and everyone else. Numbers blinked red. By appointment. Passed through a side door without pause. The clerk with the badge A. Ramirez slid a ticket under the slot. I took a seat with a plastic water cup that warmed too fast. People with folders stood together and talked low about timing. In an hour a seal would stop more than a microphone. I had a number. They had a door. Toner hung in the air, dry and thin. A copier rattled once and breathed out warm sheets in a stack. A. Ramirez called. Next. I brought the form to the glass. Fill here, sign at the bottom, initials by each box, he said. The pen scratched once. The ink dried flat without shine. Let them call it small. My mother Margaret crossed the hall with the strap of her bag tight. My father Thomas flicked his phone screen and didn't angle his head. They moved with a line that didn't need numbers. No pause, no glance, no change in pace. I finished the boxes and kept my letters block and even. Paper spoke without emotion. A. Ramirez set the page under the scanner and drew a smooth line. Light passed slow. The feeder spit a warm set without a curl. He squared the corners to the guide and drove 2 staples clean. Copies on all, he said. I nodded once. Gray dust from toner marked 2 fingers and wouldn't wipe off. Edges mattered here. I went to the payment window. The tape roll faced the sun. The cashier behind glass said, "Copy set and binding." I slid the card under the lip and held the stub at the edge. The machine beeped. The receipt came out warm and straight. Amount printed clear, signature stayed where the box wanted it. Rules stayed in straight lines. The corridor breathed cold air across the floor through the automatic door. 2 men in suits carried thick binders with colored tabs. A woman shifted weight, set a folder on her forearm, and kept moving. I read the dates again and checked each initial in its square. The form asked for facts, not opinions. Later one file would open a door they kept closed. A security guard nudged a rope post to straighten the path line. Someone said, "By 4," and someone else nodded without thanks. I put the ticket in my pocket and kept the set flat. The keys to the Ford F-150 knocked once, then went quiet. A back printer clicked, spun, and settled into silence. Silence did enough. I crossed to the UPS store near the light at the corner. Inside smelled like cardboard, tape, and heated laminate. The notary looked up. "What do you need today?" "Stitch, stamp, and date on every page," I said. He stacked the set, tapped it to the glass edge, and squared it. No ceremony. Just steps. He pressed 2 staples deeper, no tilt and no split. The round stamp sat under the signature, the date printed right. "Every page?" he asked. "Every page," I answered. He slid the run across a pad and returned the originals. Into a folder with a red bar down the side. Sleeves were ready for the work. I opened the clear sleeves my Uncle Samuel had handed me. Copies to copies, receipts to receipts, notes into a separate jacket. Air ran to the corner as I pressed the plastic flat. The sleeve creaked once and settled against the counter. I wrote time on the back, small and square. Small marks carried weight. The bell over the door chimed soft when I stepped outside. Heat held the cars. The sidewalk kept a strip of shade. I set the shoebox on the passenger seat and lifted the lid. Left side took the stack of sets. Right side took the red bar folder. The red bar spine stood up and didn't get buried. Nothing loose under the lid. I drove back to county records and joined the slow lane. A. Ramirez took the second packet without questions and without a look. He stamped the intake, crossed the date, and wrote, 4 o'clock. The feeder pulled the block without a jam and returned it clean. "Ready at 4, he said. "Fine," I said. Patience worked here. The corridor flowed around islands of chairs and columns. My mother Margaret stood near. Information. Hand on the bag strap. My father Thomas scrolled and tapped once to wake his screen. The by appointment door opened, closed, and kept its glow. I walked the shade line by the stairwell sign and read it again. I stayed in shadow. They faced the bright doorway. A woman at check-in called a last name I knew. No one turned. The name belonged to another file. The ceiling fan cut the room into short pieces of sound. A postage sheet asked to hold the ticket until called. My ticket warmed in my palm and kept its corner sharp. In 1 minute this date would draw a boundary. I left when the lane loosened and the room exhaled once. The truck door shut clean and held a tight seal. A cheap soda machine at the end of the hall kept humming. The set didn't slide when I braked at the light. The shoebox didn't rattle against the floor mat. Nothing bent. Nothing shifted. Home kept cool air and the smell of paper. I laid every sleeve on the table in clean rows. Receipt to receipt, set to set, signatures in one column. Time on the backs in pencil, straight and block. Clips in a cup, staples where they were sewn on purpose. Order before anything else. A napkin lifted half the toner from my fingers. A clean rag pulled the rest. Gray still lived near the nails. I wrote 2 envelopes. County, sets, originals, separate. The shoebox took both without bow or push. The lid settled. The seams showed no daylight. Jackets, not loose paper. I set one thing on top, a place card without a name. It matched the edge of the upper envelope without overhang. White stayed white, corners held square, no lint stuck. I slid the stack to the center so the light fell even. The phone buzzed once, my sister Grace. You coming by? I wrote, yes, and turned the screen face down. My mother Margaret texted a time for photos, no question mark. My father Thomas dropped a pin, no words to go with it. I checked the intake stamp on the last page one more time. 4 o'clock. Sat black with a clean line under it. The red bar folder didn't touch anything else on the table. Later they would ask for context. The stack would answer. I pulled the chair back, knees against the table frame. I drew the place card closer, then let it go. It left a faint track on the glass and nothing more. Red bar left, sets right, the card centered and still. I looked at the clock and didn't change my pace. The stapler clicked once. The place cards stayed on top. County records kept glass between the desk and everyone else. Numbers blinked red. By appointment. Passed through a side door without pause. The clerk with the badge A. Ramirez slid a ticket under the slot. I took a seat with a plastic water cup that warmed too fast. People with folders stood together and talked low about timing. In an hour a seal would stop more than a microphone. I had a number. They had a door. Toner hung in the air, dry and thin. A copier rattled once and breathed out warm sheets in a stack. A. Ramirez called. Next. I brought the form to the glass. Fill here, sign at the bottom, initials by each box, he said. The pen scratched once. The ink dried flat without shine. Let them call it small. My mother Margaret crossed the hall with the strap of her bag tight. My father Thomas flicked his phone screen and didn't angle his head. They moved with a line that didn't need numbers. No pause, no glance, no change in pace. I finished the boxes and kept my letters block and even. Paper spoke without emotion. A. Ramirez set the page under the scanner and drew a smooth line. Light passed slow. The feeder spit a warm set without a curl. He squared the corners to the guide and drove 2 staples clean. Copies on all, he said. I nodded once. Gray dust from toner marked 2 fingers and wouldn't wipe off. Edges mattered here. I went to the payment window. The tape roll faced the sun. The cashier behind glass said, Copy set and binding. I slid the card under the lip and held the stub at the edge. The machine beeped. The receipt came out warm and straight. Amount printed clear, signature stayed where the box wanted it. Rules stayed in straight lines. The corridor breathed cold air across the floor through the automatic door. 2 men in suits carried thick binders with colored tabs. A woman shifted weight, set a folder on her forearm, and kept moving. I read the dates again and checked each initial in its square. The form asked for facts, not opinions. Later one file would open a door they kept closed. A security guard nudged a rope post to straighten the path line. Someone said, By 4, and someone else nodded without thanks. I put the ticket in my pocket and kept the set flat. The keys to the Ford F-150 knocked once, then went quiet. A back printer clicked, spun, and settled into silence. Silence did enough. I crossed to the UPS store near the light at the corner. Inside smelled like cardboard, tape, and heated laminate. The notary looked up. "What do you need today?" "Stitch, stamp, and date on every page," I said. He stacked the set, tapped it to the glass edge, and squared it. No ceremony. Just steps. He pressed 2 staples deeper, no tilt and no split. The round stamp sat under the signature, the date printed right. "Every page?" he asked. "Every page," I answered. He slid the run across a pad and returned the originals. Into a folder with a red bar down the side. Sleeves were ready for the work. I opened the clear sleeves my Uncle Samuel had handed me. Copies to copies, receipts to receipts, notes into a separate jacket. Air ran to the corner as I pressed the plastic flat. The sleeve creaked once and settled against the counter. I wrote time on the back, small and square. Small marks carried weight. The bell over the door chimed soft when I stepped outside. Heat held the cars. The sidewalk kept a strip of shade. I set the shoebox on the passenger seat and lifted the lid. Left side took the stack of sets. Right side took the red bar folder. The red bar spine stood up and didn't get buried. Nothing loose under the lid. I drove back to county records and joined the slow lane. A. Ramirez took the second packet without questions and without a look. He stamped the intake, crossed the date, and wrote, 4 o'clock. The feeder pulled the block without a jam and returned it clean. "Ready at 4, he said. "Fine," I said. Patience worked here. The corridor flowed around islands of chairs and columns. My mother Margaret stood near. Information. Hand on the bag strap. My father Thomas scrolled and tapped once to wake his screen. The by appointment, door opened, closed, and kept its glow. I walked the shade line by the stairwell sign and read it again. I stayed in shadow, they faced the bright doorway. A woman at check-in called a last name I knew. No one turned, the name belonged to another file. The ceiling fan cut the room into short pieces of sound. A postage sheet asked to hold the ticket until called. My ticket warmed in my palm and kept its corner sharp. In 1 minute this date would draw a boundary. I left when the lane loosened and the room exhaled once. The truck door shut clean and held a tight seal. A cheap soda machine at the end of the hall kept humming. The set didn't slide when I braked at the light. The shoebox didn't rattle against the floor mat. Nothing bent. Nothing shifted. Home kept cool air and the smell of paper. I laid every sleeve on the table in clean rows. Receipt to receipt, set to set, signatures in one column. Time on the backs in pencil, straight and block. Clips in a cup, staples where they were sewn on purpose. Order before anything else. A napkin lifted half the toner from my fingers. A clean rag pulled the rest, gray still lid near the nails. I wrote 2 envelopes. County, sets, originals, separate. The shoebox took both without bow or push. The lid settled. The seams showed no daylight. Jackets, not loose paper. I set one thing on top, a place card without a name. It matched the edge of the upper envelope without overhang. White stayed white, corners held square, no lint stuck. I slid the stack to the center so the light fell even. The phone buzzed once, my sister Grace. "You coming by?" I wrote, yes, and turned the screen face down. My mother Margaret texted a time for photos, no question mark. My father Thomas dropped a pin, no words to go with it. I checked the intake stamp on the last page one more time. 4 o'clock. Sat black with a clean line under it. The red bar folder didn't touch anything else on the table. Later they would ask for context. The stack would answer. I pulled the chair back, knees against the table frame. I drew the place card closer, then let it go. It left a faint track on the glass and nothing more. Red bar left, sets right, the card centered and still. I looked at the clock and didn't change my pace. The stapler clicked once. The place cards stayed on top. The Marriott Ballroom in Dallas held light and music steady. The stage sat in the open, the microphone did too. Not mine. I stood by a column, closer to the service door and air vents. A plastic cup of water in my hand, crystal on their tables. My sister Grace stayed in the center frame under the arch. My mother Margaret waited at the bar, her glass at camera height. My father Thomas spoke to the coordinator without looking toward the walls. In a few minutes one card would stop more than a toast. The MC paged through a leather folder of name cards. My rectangle was in his hand, not on any table. He turned the card on its edge, checked sequence without raising his eyes. At the bar, a receipt printer chattered, the tape curled and fell. Steam rose from their plates in even lines across white china. My plate cooled on a highbow table beneath the vent. Plastic rang softer than their glass. The groom Eric stepped to block me from the cameras. He straightened his cuff and asked, "You good?" I said, "Yes." He nodded. "Parents speak in a minute." I nodded back. That covered it. The MC slid my card closer to the mic, but not on top. Shade for me. Light for them. A server looped around me with a tray and never brushed my sleeve. The music dropped to an undertrack. The DJ lifted a thumb. I took a sip. Water stayed cold, same as it came. The lid squeaked and set firmly. My fingers stayed dry. A faint circle from my cup flashed and faded on lacquer. Let them think it was nothing. My mother Margaret stepped toward the stage and turned her wrist. My father Thomas looked across the room, then down at his watch. Grace touched her veil. The photographer asked for 2 seconds still. The MC took the top card and spoke another name cleanly. My rectangle stayed a half-inch lower on his stack. Words ran over place settings. I pushed through the heavy service door and stood by the edge. The highway hummed to the left, heat pushed without brakes. In the truck sat a 7-Eleven coffee. The lid clicked under my thumb. Degreaser from the morning yard still lived on my sleeves. The Ford F-150 keys rang in my pocket and went quiet. I could work in the dark. I sent no message, only checked the time on the screen. Dust lifted on the threshold and held to my soles. The plastic lid did not leak. My hands stayed clean. A napkin from the glove box pulled the smell, not completely. I breathed once and walked back inside without speaking. I didn't ask for anything. Inside, the vent drew a cool ribbon along the wall. The MC pressed the cards with his palm against the folder. My rectangle moved nearer to the mic, still not first. The bartender tore a receipt. Warm paper dropped into a box. A server rolled a bucket of ice to the water station. Hot went to them. Cold stayed with me. My mother Margaret held her glass just below her face. My father Thomas turned his shoulder for the camera, eyes forward. Grace laughed the right length, never leaving the light. The MC said, "Mother of the bride," and gestured. My card hovered under his finger and did not rise. Order liked a straight edge. I marked the time again and flipped my phone face down. The music thinned to almost nothing. The DJ read the MC's lips. The cooler hummed near the wall. Ice cracked inside the pitcher. My plastic cup lay on the highbow. The circle blinked and went dull. I lifted my hand. The mark stayed, but did not spread. Silence did the heavy lifting. The toast went in short sentences, no ornaments, as promised. The MC shifted his stack by half an inch, nothing more. My rectangle touched the top for a beat, then slipped lower. Coffee moved to the far rows. My list did not include coffee. Flashes popped once over the arch, and went back to ready. I stood with the column. They framed the light. Later a single pause would carry further than any speech. Eric glanced my way for a second, and looked off again. He held his position for the angle, not for me. The MC lowered the mic toward the stand and pulled the cable. The bartender cleared empties, then set new stems to the mark. I took another sip. The water never changed. The line held without my words. My mother Margaret tilted her glass until a neat reflection hit. My father Thomas clicked his screen and pocketed the phone. Grace signaled the MC the sequence without saying any name. The cards lay tight. The edge ran flush and straight. My rectangle did not break the row. It wasn't time. That was exactly the point. From the kitchen a server came with fish, steam carried from the door. At my table no steam rose, only condensation on the lid. The DJ nodded to himself and brightened the track one shade. Someone said, "Sorry," past me, and never waited for my answer. I stepped half a foot back and kept the aisle open. Patience paid by itself. The MC pinned the cards under his thumb and centered the mic. He said, "One more toast, then the dance." I watched Eric square his tie and stand on the tape mark. Grace took his elbow. The photographer lifted the camera higher. The wet circle from my cup was almost dry. In a minute the click would answer for me. The MC covered the cards with his hand against the vent. The bartender tore the tape cleanly and tossed half into the box. A server lifted spent plastic from the edge tables into a tub. I nudged my cup a millimeter and left it there. The stage took another toast without me in the line. That was how it had to be. My mother Margaret finished without searching for a face and back. My father Thomas added one sentence, exactly one, no extras. Grace smiled. The music rose 4 notches on the board. Cameras held the frame. The MC nodded to the operator at the corner. My rectangle stayed in the folder. It sat where it belonged. They kept the light and movement. I kept sequence and time. I asked for no turn. I saw what I needed. The door to the lot stayed cracked. A stripe of warm air slipped in. The MC tapped the mic once with a nail and lifted it higher. The room answered short, the way a first dance wants it. I set my palm on the table and took it back. The microphone clicked. That was enough. The lawyer's reception kept glass, badges, and even light. People with appointments were taken through the left door. I got a number slip and chairs by the cooler. They held lemon water in thin glasses. I had plastic. The room watched who went in, and who waited. In 1 hour my place card would hold a line firmer than a staple. My mother Margaret raised a glass in the Marriott Hall. My father Thomas checked the camera angle without looking up. My brother Ryan stood by the arch and scrolled his phone. They didn't know the first envelope had already left. Let them think it was nothing. The secretary opened Conference B and nodded me in. The lawyer said, "We start with dates. No small talk." On his table, stamp pad, stapler, tray for copies. I set the file down. Cardboard rasped across the desk. Fresh toner hung in the air from the printer. Shade for me. Bright for them. I spread stacks, receipts, stitch sets, printed logs, call records. The lawyer drew a ruler down the margins, checking pagination. "Where's confirmation of time?" he asked, eyes on the edge. I passed the UPS store receipt. "Wait, barcode, intake minute." He marked the corner. "Good. Next, signatures and checkout. Receipts to receipts. Copies to copies." I stated the names, my mother Margaret, my father Thomas, my brother Ryan. The lawyer printed them carefully on the notices, block letters. He checked addresses, zip codes, added certified on each line. "Do they understand what's coming?" he asked, still calm. "Not yet," I said. "They think it's just talk." Plastic rang softer than glass. The secretary brought a stack of envelopes with pull strips. Green USPS return cards lay on top, edges clean and square. "We'll assemble 3 sets," the lawyer said. "Original, your copy, archive." The stapler thumped twice. The corners lined up without drift. Warm paper cooled as it touched the glass tabletop. Later the green cards would come back to the top page. I signed where the blue tabs called for my name. He checked the date against the UPS minute on the receipt. The scanner passed one clean line. The seals showed on screen. The secretary fed a label strip. The printer chirped and cut. We set barcodes tied along the margin, straight to straight. The log required straight rows. I slid in the clear sleeves my Uncle Samuel had suggested. The lawyer nodded at the order. Easier to verify twice. In my copy I dropped a bookmark, my place card. Cardboard sat between pages, holding the break without slipping. One return to the refrain was enough. In the hallway someone argued about a banquet charge. The door closed softly. The sound stopped at the glass. The secretary dialed UPS pickup and then USPS certified. "I'll carry these myself," I said. "I want the window." She handed me a box. New cardboard. The lid held tight. Hot belonged to their plates. Cold lived in these envelopes. By the exit I saw tracking flip to "In transit." I took a screenshot and mailed it to myself. Subject line, date and minute. The thread showed in order. It sat beside the stitch sets and the barcode photos. No extras. No blanks. My mother Margaret laughed at the MC's mic then. My father Thomas lifted a glass for a staged shot. My brother Ryan showed a clip to someone near the DJ. They still didn't know the envelope was already processing. Let it stay that way. Patience worked too. I carried the batch to the UPS store counter. The sign read, "See clerk for certified." I waited. A couple ahead collected a box and stepped aside. The clerk set my load on the scale and typed the zip. "Insurance?" he asked. "Minimum," I said. He nodded and printed. "Let paper say it for me." He fixed each label, pressed hard along every edge. The tape gun hissed once. The seam lay flat and sealed. The receipt came out warm, curled, and dropped into a dish. I took it, read the time, and folded it square. The cashier tore the extra stub and handed it over. No noise. Just steps. Next door, the USPS counter checked addresses and batch number. The clerk stamped the top notice. The mark took clean. "Return card will come back by mail," she said. "That works," I answered, moving the stack to outgoing. The lid lowered once. The envelopes went down and disappeared. Track mattered more than talk. On the sidewalk I opened the copy box and checked edges. No staple had shifted. No sheet rode long. My place card sat as a divider, holding the section steady. I closed the lid and set the box behind the seat. Keys touched the console and fell quiet. I still worked fine in the shade. My phone vibrated once. Tracking advanced again. USPS showed the batch number posted for the day. I took a second screenshot and clipped it to the thread. One timestamp followed another, line for line. No rush. Only order. Tomorrow their signatures would land where the mark already waited. I pictured the hall, my mother Margaret at the toast, smiling. My father Thomas tapping the screen to find more light. My brother Ryan nodding toward the dance floor, phone still up. They kept the stage. I kept the box. Each of us stayed in place. I went back to the lawyer for the send log. The secretary slid my file into a clear sleeve. I set it inside the box, corner to corner. The lawyer said only, "The rest is on schedule." I nodded. That was all we needed. Steps in the corridor did not change the rows. At the car I lifted the lid once, then stopped. The place card held the section, firm and straight. I pressed the lid down until it seated. The postal stamp clicked once in my head. That was enough. The side conference room at the Marriott in Dallas stayed bright. A coordinator set a recorder on the table and checked the time. Their glasses clinked in the banquet hall. My paper lay flat here. My sister Grace took a seat across, eyes on the door. My mother Margaret adjusted her bracelet and didn't look at me. My father Thomas kept his phone face down, screen still awake. The groom Eric stood near the end, tie centered, cuff straightened. In 5 minutes one card would decide more than speeches. I set a box of folders on the table. Warm paper pressed my palm through the file cover. Fresh toner marked the last page I printed downstairs. I slid the place card with my name to the corner. Its edge caught the light and stayed square. I took the side seat. They took the center. Eric looked toward the cameras, not toward me. He said, "We'll keep this simple and clean." I said, Dates first. Then amounts. Then copies. He nodded once and put his phone face down. My mother Margaret asked, "How long will this take?" I said, "As long as the pages need." My father Thomas tapped once on glass and stopped. My brother Ryan came late and took the last chair. Ryan looked at the stack, then at his watch. Glass for them. Plastic for me. I opened the first folder and turned it toward them. County records, I said. Stamped and sealed. I named the parcel number and the filing month. I put the seal under the light and didn't move it. No one reached. Only their eyes moved. Paper carried the work. I marked the second folder with a yellow tab. UPS store copies, I said. Notary page behind the first. The stamp showed date and time, clear and centered. Eric read it out loud so no one could pretend. My sister Grace watched my hands, not my face. I spoke numbers, not feelings. They listened to totals, not to me. I slid a receipt strip from the envelope and flattened it. Hotel printing, I said. 53 pages. 3 sets. The coordinator wrote the count on a small pad. Her eyes stayed on the pad, not on the people. The air smelled like carpet cleaner and warm plastic lids. Later the clerk would file this set unchanged. I placed a short stack of emails, printed in order. Subject lines faced them, black and plain. Your name appears here, I told Thomas, pointing once. My reply appears here, I told Margaret, pointing once. Ryan rubbed his temple but didn't deny the line. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush the pages. Eric shifted to block one lens from seeing the stack. He said, "Page by page. Keep it steady." I said, "Page by page works. No speeches." The coordinator tore a note clean from her pad. I brought out the ledger copy with the totals. I traced the month with a clean thumb, not a pen. I read each line the same way. Date. Amount. Note. I slid it to Grace. She looked, then looked away. She held the edge and let it go. The card with my name stayed still. I set the place card as a tab on the next folder. The name face down. The tab held the line. Margaret asked, "Is this really necessary?" I said, "The dates decide that, not me." Thomas drew one long breath through his nose. I kept to documents. I kept to order. I stacked sent over. Received. I stacked copy over. Original. I stacked email over. Note. Edges matched. Margins held the same light. Eric watched the margins, not the faces. The room heard the pages. I set a notary sheet on top of the stack. Signed in front of a witness, I said quietly. Initials here and here. Time in the corner. Thomas glanced at Ryan. Ryan looked at the door. Grace kept both hands flat on the table. Eric said, "Go on." I went on. I slid a 2-sentence letter to Margaret. "Both now," I said. "Out loud or not." She read the first, then pressed her lips together. She didn't read the second. She folded once, unfolded. Ryan adjusted his chair and stopped halfway. I kept my eyes on the line. I placed 3 photographs by the ledger. Same day as the email, I said. Entry hall. No captions. No arrows. Only the timestamp. Ryan said, "We don't need photos." Eric said, "They stay." Move to summary. Soon an envelope would leave this room without me. I opened the last folder and set the index on top. 1 page, black lines, plain numbers. I read each item. I checked each box. I paused only for ink to dry. The coordinator watched the pen stop and start. I lined up the signature strips in silence. Grace asked, "Do you want to say anything else?" I said, "No. The order says enough." Margaret said, "You could have called first." I said, "You had my number all year." I kept the pace even. Eric slid the summary toward Thomas and tapped once. Thomas didn't reach for the pen. He looked at Margaret. Margaret didn't look back. Ryan pushed his chair a little, then stopped moving. Silence filled the space where their words sat. I put the place card on the stack again. It held the set like a straight finger. I named the total and the date range. I named the account reference and file location. Grace swallowed and washed her hands. No one asked for a toast. No one raised a glass. Eric cleared his throat once and looked at the coordinator. He said, "Record the closure as agreed." I said, "Record the closure." "Then we're done." The coordinator wrote the word, "closed," on her pad. Her handwriting stayed small and even. In 1 minute there would be nothing left to say. I checked the count, folders, photos, emails, receipts, seals. Edges stayed square. Cover pages faced up. I slid the place card into Thomas's folder, face down. They would open it first. They would see the name first. One page never made it to the stack. Fair or too far? I pushed the box an inch toward the middle. I said the last date. The numbers matched. Eric said, "All recorded." I said, "Enough." The coordinator capped the pen and closed the pad. The scanner clicked once. That was enough. You've been listening to Cheating Tales Real Stories, Betrayal, Family Lies, Payback Without Noise. Would you have stopped there, or pushed further? Subscribe for more. Drop a comment, I read them all, and I'll pin the first.